How do you survive when your own commander leaves you for dead in the wreckage? Elena Vance had everything against her, wounded, without water, and officially declared dead by a corrupt officer. But while the army celebrated a false hero, a mysterious hexadecimal signal emerged from the middle of nowhere. It was the signature of a mind that refused to fade away. With an improvised transponder and a USB drive worth a court-martial, Elena proved that intelligence is the deadliest weapon on the battlefield. This is the story of the woman who turned silence into a sentence of justice. The heat in the Korangal Valley didn't just burn. It had a weight to it, a physical pressure that pressed down on the shoulders of every man and woman stationed at Outpost Restrepo, turning the air into a suffocating blanket of dust and diesel fumes. For most of the soldiers in the 2nd Platoon, the heat was just another enemy to be fought with hydration packs and complaints. But for Specialist Elena Vance, the heat was a variable in a complex equation she spent every waking hour solving. Elena was 34 years old, possessing a face that had seen too much fatigue and not enough sun, framed by hair that was always pulled back into a severe, functional bun that defied the humidity. She wasn't infantry. She wasn't special forces. She was a signals intelligence analyst, a title that, in the eyes of Captain Marcus Sterling, meant she was little more than a gloried secretary who had wandered too far from the air-conditioned safety of Bagram Airfield. Sterling was the kind of officer who looked the part perfectly, jawline square, uniform tailored, voice booming with the confidence of a man who had read about war in books, but hadn't yet felt the true, paralyzing terror of it in his bones. He treated the command center like a stage and his soldiers like props, and Elena Vance was a prop he kept trying to shove into the background. She was the quiet woman in the corner with the dual monitors and the headset, the one who listened to the static of the valley while the men planned their glory. They didn't see her. They didn't see how her eyes narrowed when the background noise on an intercepted frequency shifted by a fraction of a decibel. They didn't see how she cross-referenced thermal imaging with goat herder movements to predict supply runs. To them, she was invisible, a piece of office equipment that required water and chow. But invisibility has a texture, and Elena had learned to wear it like armor. It allowed her to observe. It allowed her to see the cracks in the foundation long before the building collapsed. The cracks began to show on a Tuesday, during the briefing for Operation Hammer Drop. Sterling stood at the front of the room, tapping a laser pointer against a topographic map that was 3 weeks out of date. He was outlining a patrol route through the eastern sector, a show of force intended to rattle the local insurgents. His voice was full of bluster, talking about dominating the battle space and kinetic action. Elena sat in the back, her hands folded over a file folder that contained the truth Sterling was ignoring. She waited for a pause in his monologue, a gap in the ego, and when it came, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady, the voice of someone who deals in facts, not wishes. "Captain," she said, and heads turned. It was rare for the furniture to speak. That route puts the convoy in a dead zone for comms between mile markers 4 and 7, and intel suggests the chatter in that sector has gone dark for the last 48 hours. Silence isn't empty, sir. It's a preparation. Sterling had paused, the laser pointer wavering slightly on the map. He looked at her with a mixture of amusement and irritation, the way one looks at a child interrupting a serious conversation. "Specialist Vance," he said, dragging out her rank with a condescending drawl. "I appreciate your concern for the radio waves, but we have air support on standby, and this platoon doesn't hide from shadows. Stick to fixing the printers and let the infantry handle the tactics." A ripple of laughter had moved through the room. It wasn't malicious laughter, not exactly. It was the laughter of exclusion. It was the sound of a club reminding an outsider that they didn't belong. Elena didn't blush. She didn't look down. She held Sterling's gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, her face a mask of professional detachment, before she nodded once. "Understood, sir," she said. She didn't argue. She didn't beg him to listen. She simply closed her folder. She knew with the cold certainty of a mathematician that the equation was unbalanced, and she knew that the result would be blood. 3 days later, the convoy rolled out. Elena was assigned to the 4th vehicle, a Humvee packed with communications gear that Sterling insisted was redundant, but necessary for full-spectrum dominance. The ride was a bone-rattling ordeal. the suspension groaning over rocks the size of watermelons. Inside the vehicle, the air was hot and smelled of stale sweat and CLP gun oil. The soldiers around her were joking, adrenaline making them chatty, talking about what they would eat when they got back, about girls, about cars. Elena didn't talk. She watched the spectrum analyzer on her knee, watching the signal strength bars flicker and die as they entered the valley she had warned them about. The silence on the radio wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed against her eardrums. She reached for the handset to log the signal drop, and that was when the world ended. It didn't happen like in the movies with a dramatic slow-motion explosion. It was sudden, violent, and deafening. An IED shredded the lead vehicle, flipping a 6-ton truck into the air like a toy. The concussion wave hit Elena's vehicle a split second later, shattering the bulletproof glass into a spider web of opacity. Then came the gunfire. It poured down from the ridges, a torrential rain of lead that turned the convoy into a kill zone. The confusion was absolute. Sterling's voice cracked over the comms, high-pitched and frantic, screaming orders that contradicted each other. "Push through. No. Fall back. Return fire." It was the sound of a man watching his career burn. Elena was thrown against the door, her head striking the frame. Blood, warm and sticky, ran into her eye. She didn't panic. Her training, the hours of repetitive drills that the infantry mocked, kicked in. She grabbed her carbine. She grabbed the essential encryption keys. She kicked the door open and rolled into the dirt, the air around her snapping with supersonic cracks of passing bullets. The retreat was messy. It was a rout. The air support Sterling had promised was delayed by weather in the north. Another detail Elena had noted in her ignored report. The order came to abandon the vehicles and move to the extraction point, a flat ridge 2 clicks west. Smoke, thick and black, rolled across the valley floor, reducing visibility to 0. In the chaos, the platoon fractured. Groups of men ran blindly, seeking cover. Sterling was on the radio calling for the medevac birds, his voice bordering on hysteria. Get us out now." He wasn't doing a head count. He wasn't checking his perimeter. He was running. Elena was pinned down behind the burning wreckage of the 4th Humvee, suppressing fire directed at a muzzle flash on the ridge. She was providing cover for 2 young privates who were scrambling up the slope. She saw them make it. She saw the first Chinook swoop down, its rotors churning the smoke into a vortex. She saw men scrambling aboard. She keyed her radio. "Command, this is Vance. I am at the crash site, requesting cover for movement." Static. Nothing but static. She checked the frequency. It was dead. The jammer she had warned them about was active. She looked up just in time to see the Chinook lift off. She watched the ramp close. She watched the landing gear retract. And she watched Captain Sterling, standing in the door gunner's position, looking out at the smoke. He didn't see her. He wasn't looking for her. He was looking at his own survival. The helicopter banked hard and disappeared into the haze. The sound of the rotors faded, replaced by the ringing in her ears and the sporadic crack of sniper fire. She was alone. The realization didn't hit her with panic. It hit her with a cold, clarifying focus. The emotional part of her brain wanted to scream, to weep at the injustice of it. But the professional part, the part that had spent 15 years analyzing data, shut that down immediately. Emotions consume oxygen. Emotions cloud judgment. And right now, judgment was the only weapon she had left. She lay still in the dirt, covering herself with a blast blanket from the wreckage. She waited. The enemy swept the area 20 minutes later. She could hear their voices, excited, shouting over the spoils of the burning trucks. She could smell the unwashed wool of their tunics as they passed within feet of her hiding spot. She didn't breathe. She slowed her heart rate, a technique she had learned to manage stress during high-intensity decoding sessions. She became a stone. She became the dirt. They moved on, assuming anyone left behind was dead in the fire. When night fell, bringing a freezing chill that bit through her uniform, Elena moved. She didn't run. Running leaves tracks. Running makes noise. She crawled. She moved with the agonizing slowness of a glacier, dragging her rucksack, checking every placement of her hand and knee to avoid shifting the loose shale. Her destination wasn't the extraction point. She knew they would be watching that. Her destination was the graveyard, a cluster of old Soviet ruins 5 miles east, a place she had seen on the satellite imagery that Sterling had barely glanced at. It was high ground. It had caves, and it had the wreckage of previous wars. For the next 6 days, Elena Vance ceased to be a person and became a creature of survival. Her water ran out on the second day. The thirst was a living thing, a parasite that clawed at her throat and made her vision swim. She drank dew licked from the rocks in the pre-dawn hours. She rationed her 2 protein bars until they were nothing but crumbs. But the physical suffering was secondary to the psychological siege. The silence of the desert was immense, a vacuum that tried to suck the sanity out of her. It would have been easy to give up. It would have been easy to fire her weapon into the air and end it. But anger kept her alive. Not a hot, fiery rage, but a cold, hard knot of indignation. They think I am incompetent, she thought as she shivered in a cave on the 4th night. They think I am just a clerk. I will not let them be right. That need to be right, to prove the validity of her existence, fueled her more than food ever could. On the 5th day, while scavenging the ruins of a Soviet supply depot, she found it. It wasn't water. It wasn't a radio. It was a crashed surveillance drone, an American model, likely down for months due to mechanical failure. It was half buried, its casing cracked, its optics shattered. To an infantryman, it was trash. To Elena, it was a treasure chest. She dragged it into the deepest part of her cave. She didn't have tools. She used the edge of her dog tag as a screwdriver. She used a sharp flake of obsidian to strip the delicate wiring. Her hands, shaking from dehydration and exhaustion, became steady the moment they touched the circuit board. This was her world. This was the language she spoke better than anyone. The drone's main battery was dead, but the backup capacitor for the emergency transponder had a faint charge. The transmitter itself was damaged, the frequency crystal cracked. Elena spent 12 hours working on a circuit the size of a fingernail. She bypassed the encryption module. She rerouted the power from the camera servo to the signal booster. It was delicate, impossible work, done in the dark, guided only by touch and memory. She didn't try to send a voice message. Voice takes too much power, and voice is easily intercepted. She needed a pulse, a digital heartbeat. She configured the transponder to emit a burst transmission. Not an SOS. An SOS is generic. An SOS could be a trap. Elena programmed a sequence of numbers. 1905 22 01 14 03 05. It looked random. It wasn't. It was the alphanumeric code for Vance, followed by her service number, followed by the specific encryption key for the day she was lost. It was a message that said, I am here. I am compromised, but I am still working. She connected the wires. A tiny red LED on the board blinked once, twice. Then it settled into a rhythmic, weak pulse. She set it on the ledge of the cave, aimed at the slice of sky visible through the rocks, and she waited. She closed her eyes, her body finally shutting down, trusting in the physics she had dedicated her life to. 400 miles away, in a windowless room at the Joint Special Operations Command, the air was cool and smelled of coffee and ozone. Master Chief Jonas Breaker Holland was a man who looked like he had been carved out of a cliff face. He was 45, with a beard that was more salt than pepper and eyes that missed nothing. He was staring at a monitor that showed the electromagnetic spectrum of the Korangal Valley. It was a mess of noise, static, radio interference, unauthorized broadcasts. Most operators tuned it out. Breaker was looking for patterns. He saw a spike, a tiny, insignificant blip in the noise floor. It was so faint that the automated filters were scrubbing it as background radiation, but it repeated, every 30 seconds. Exact timing, precision. Breaker leaned in, his chair creaking under his bulk. He isolated the frequency. He ran it through the decryption algorithm. The screen flashed red, then green. ID confirmed. Spec. E. Vance. Breaker froze. He knew the name. He had read the report Sterling had filed. Missing in action. Presumed KIA due to separation during enemy contact. He had smelled the bullshit in that report from the first line. Sterling had claimed the area was overrun. He had claimed there was no way to go back. But this signal, this wasn't the panic beacon of a terrified soldier. This was a modified, hacked signal coming from a piece of equipment that shouldn't be transmitting. She MacGyvered it, Breaker whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. The crazy girl MacGyvered a drone. He stood up and walked straight to the office of the base commander, bypassing the aide who tried to stop him. Captain Sterling was there, drinking coffee, looking relaxed. He was already working on his transfer papers, looking to get out of the combat zone before the inquiry started. When Breaker slammed the printout of the signal onto his desk, the coffee jumped in the mug. "What is this, Chief?" Sterling asked, annoyed. "That," Breaker said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the small room, "is a ghost. Or it's the woman you left to die, proving she's smarter than you are." Sterling picked up the paper. He paled. "It's a glitch. An echo. Equipment malfunction. Vance is dead, Chief. We saw the site burn." Breaker leaned over the desk, invading Sterling's personal space. "A glitch doesn't transmit a service number in hexadecimal, Captain. A glitch doesn't bypass a burnt-out encryption chip. She is alive. She is waiting. And we are going to get her." Sterling stood up, trying to muster his rank. "I am not authorizing a mission based on a sensor error into a hot zone. It's too risky. We've lost enough." Breaker didn't blink. "You're not authorizing it because if we bring her back, your report becomes a confession. I'm going to the Admiral, and I'm going to tell him that while you were writing her off, she was rewriting the tech manual in a cave with no water." "Who do you think he's going to believe? The hero officer who ran away? Or the specialist who refused to die?" Sterling slumped back into his chair, defeated by the weight of a truth he couldn't spin. The extraction was authorized within the hour. The SEAL team moved with the efficiency of a predatory animal. Breaker led the stack. They flew in low. Nap of the Earth, the Black Hawk helicopter shuddering as it hugged the contours of the valley to stay under the radar. The signal was getting stronger. It was a beacon of defiance in the dark. When they landed near the ruins, the dust was blinding. The team fanned out, night vision goggles turning the world into a green phosphor dream. Breaker moved toward the coordinates. "Vance!" he called out over the comms, though he knew she wouldn't have a headset. "Vance, if you can hear me, signal." Nothing, just the wind. Then, a small rock skittered down the slope. Breaker raised his weapon, then lowered it. A figure emerged from the shadows of the cave entrance. Elena looked like a specter. Her uniform was rags, her face was gaunt, the skin tight over her cheekbones, her lips cracked and bleeding. But she was standing. She was holding the drone circuit board in one hand and her rifle in the other. She didn't drop the gun. She kept it at the low ready until she saw Breaker's patch. The realization that she was safe didn't break her. She didn't collapse sobbing. She didn't scream. She simply nodded, a slow, tired movement. "You're late," she rasped, her voice sounding like two stones grinding together. Breaker laughed, a short, sharp sound of pure respect. "Traffic was a bitch, Vance. Let's go." As they moved to the helicopter, Elena stumbled. Breaker reached out to steady her, but she pulled away gently. She wanted to walk. She needed to walk. It was a matter of dignity. She climbed onto the bird under her own power. As she sat on the canvas bench, the adrenaline finally began to fade, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. But before she let herself sleep, she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, battered USB drive. She grabbed Breaker's sleeve and pressed it into his hand. "The logs," she whispered. "From the truck, before it burned. It has the comms. It has the orders." Breaker looked at the drive. It was the smoking gun. It was the proof that Sterling had ignored the intel, that he had panicked, that he had lied. Elena looked at him, her eyes burning with a fierce, quiet intelligence. "He knew," she said. "Make sure they know he knew." Breaker closed his fist around the drive. "Sleep, Elena. We've got the watch." The return to Bagram was the closing argument of a trial that hadn't even officially begun. Word had spread. The base knew. When the Black Hawk touched down, a crowd had gathered. Not just the medical team, but soldiers from other units, mechanics, intel officers. They wanted to see the ghost. Captain Sterling was there, forced by protocol to be present. He stood apart from the others, looking like a man waiting for the hangman. The rotors slowed. The door slid open. Breaker stepped out first, his face like thunder. He didn't look at Sterling. He turned and offered a hand to Elena. This time she took it. She stepped down onto the tarmac. The silence was absolute. It was heavy and thick. Elena Vance stood there covered in the filth of survival, smelling of dried blood and ozone. She looked small against the backdrop of the war machine, but her presence was gigantic. She didn't look at the medics, she didn't look at the crowd. She turned her head and locked eyes with Captain Sterling. It was a look that would be talked about for years. It wasn't hatred. It was disappointment. It was the look a professional gives to an amateur who has caused a disaster. It stripped Sterling of his rank, his uniform, his pretense. Under her gaze, he seemed to shrink. He looked down. He couldn't hold the weight of her eyes. Elena didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The judgment was delivered in the silence. She turned away from him, dismissing him as irrelevant, and began to walk toward the ambulance. As she passed the line of soldiers, infantrymen who had once joked about her tattoo, officers who had ignored her briefings, something happened. It wasn't planned. It started with a young corporal, a kid who had been on the convoy. He snapped to attention. He threw a salute. It was sharp, crisp, and filled with a desperate need to apologize without speaking. Then the sergeant next to him. Then the lieutenant. A wave of salutes rippled down the line. It wasn't a salute to her rank, she was just a specialist. It was a salute to her merit, to the fact that when the world burned, she was the one who walked out of the fire. Elena paused. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't salute back. She was out of uniform, unarmed, broken. But she straightened her spine. She lifted her chin. She acknowledged them with a nod. It was enough. The aftermath was swift. The USB drive breaker turned in was damning. The investigation found Sterling guilty of dereliction of duty, falsifying reports and endangerment of his troops. He was quietly removed from command, his career over, his reputation destroyed not by a public scandal, but by the undeniable facts presented by the woman he had underestimated. Elena spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When she was discharged, she didn't take leave. She didn't go home. She went back to her desk. She went back to the dark room with the monitors. But the room had changed. When she walked in, the conversation stopped. The jokes died. The new lieutenant stood up and offered her his chair at the main console. "Specialist Vance," he said, "we have some noise on Sector 4. Could you take a look?" It wasn't charity. It was deference. Elena sat down. She adjusted her headset. She looked at the waveforms dancing on the screen. She was where she belonged. Invisible to the outside world perhaps, but in this room, in this silence, she was the most powerful person alive. She was the one who listened. And finally, she was the one who was heard. Weeks later, a package arrived at her station. No return address. Inside was a small Velcro patch. It wasn't standard issue. It was custom made. It showed a simple graphic, a drone silhouette against a mountain, and underneath, a single word, Signal. It was a gift from the SEAL team. A quiet nod from the warriors who knew that the deadliest weapon on the battlefield isn't a gun. It's a mind that refuses to quit. Elena ran her thumb over the embroidered thread. She didn't smile. Not fully. But the tightness in her chest, the knot of injustice that had been there for years, finally loosened. She stuck the patch on the side of her monitor, turned back to the screen, and went back to work. The world was still dangerous. The world was still loud. But she knew who she was, and now so did they.